He has gone from that position to literally standing up on stage in front of all the mainstream media and saying, no, our goal is at least 500,000.
Look at the evidence of our own senses about what's happening in this country. When you go out onto the streets and when you look at the data that the government itself, sparsely releases, and there's just no denying what needs to be done in this country. Now, again, I think it's really us who gives people the permission to actually confront those issues.
The so-called very online right and the independent media and citizen journalists made it impossible to ignore what was happening, first outside the Epping Hotel, then the Pink Ladies came to Canary Wharf. Then we saw that spread to Norwich.
I think we should be encouraging is more of a spirit of competition. What Charlie and I have, and Connor have been calling a sort of right-wing arms race in which people like Rupert at Restore Britain and indeed Farage and indeed Robert Jenrick to some extent and Ben Habib indeed feel a great deal of motivation to try and outbid one another from the right in order to win the sympathies of an increasingly radicalizing electorate. Hello and welcome to Deprogram. This is the New Culture Forum show in which we do our best to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, particularly among the young. My name is Harrison Pitt. I am a fellow at the New Culture Forum, and since Connor Tomlinson is a very busy boy at the moment, he is being replaced this week by Charlie Downs, who is the campaigns director at Restore Britain and a writer for The Mail, stepping in as co-host. Thank you, Charlie, for joining us in that capacity. And we are joined by the celebrated broadcaster and the man behind the appropriately named show, Dan Wootton, Outspoken, which airs live on YouTube every week at 5 o'clock. Dan, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be back.
It is good to have you. Now, Reform UK have unveiled the beginnings of a mass deportations plan. Before we get into the details, into the positives, into the virtues of this plan, and indeed into what I view, and I'm sure many of us view as some of the downsides, it must be said, wouldn't you say, Dan, that it is a pretty dramatic and encouraging turn of events that Farage now feels the confidence to announce a headline policy that only a year ago he was reluctant even to entertain?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a question of will the real Farage stand up? But I do think we have to praise the shifting of the Overton window. This is, of course, a victory for the so-called online right, which probably the three of us are sort of considered part of. And for a long time, Reform and the leadership of Reform were dismissing people like us as being unrealistic and having our head in the clouds. But in fact, what's happened is that we have changed the conversation so significantly that Nigel Farage has gone from that now infamous interview with Stephen Edgington, which I think will go down in history, where he said mass deportations, and he wasn't talking about millions, by the way, hundreds of thousands of mass deportations were impossible. His words. Didn't want to discuss demographic change at all. He would not go down that path. He has gone from that position to literally standing up on stage in front of all the mainstream media and saying, no, our goal is at least 500,000. Of course, there is a debate about, does that really mean mass deportations? How serious are they about this policy? Are the costings correct? Because that seemed to have been done a little bit on the back of a fact paper with Zia Yusuf sort of doing some sums bizarrely. However, on the whole, I think we have to celebrate when we move this conversation. And the conversation in this country on mass deportations has now been moved. I do think it shows that this country is heading for a revolution, not an evolution. And that's what needs to happen.
Before I bring in Charlie, let me just ask you one point. I've seen some people set one point that has been making the rounds on Twitter, trying to deflate some of this triumphalism on the so-called very online right for sort of shifting the Overton window, say that this Farage's eagerness to announce this policy perhaps has more to do with how the national mood has changed rather than anything that's been going on online. One thinks in particular of women increasingly standing up in places like Epping, protesting against hotels. What do you say to the argument that the online right has less to do with it than these more, what would you call them, spontaneous protests?
Well, I think Nigel is completely obsessed with the mainstream media. He is an old media guy. This is what's very interesting. He's sort of similar to Donald Trump in that sense. So Trump fully embraced the new media and needed to, but fundamentally gets his news from the New York Post every morning. He likes print. Farage is someone who is very influenced, quite bizarrely in my view, by what's on the front page of the Daily Express, a completely irrelevant newspaper that will be dead in a couple of years' time. Currently, they're campaigning more about Gaza than anything else. But for Farage, that's where he comes from. But here's the key argument. Honestly, the mainstream media were never going to cover what was going on at what I describe as ground zero of this hotel, migrant hotel uprising, which is the Bell Hotel in Epping, Essex. They ignored this story. I mean, honestly, if you looked over the summer, when the whole country, I think, was close to the edge, every single night, I would always turn on the main flagship BBC and woke ITV bulletin at 10 o'clock. And virtually every night for the first 14 to 15 minutes, I promise you, that is half of their bulletin. It was never about the United Kingdom. It was about Gaza. It was about Epstein. It was about Trump. They were obsessed with deflecting from this story. What happened? The so-called very online right and the independent media and citizen journalists made it impossible to ignore what was happening. First outside the Epping Hotel, then the Pink Ladies came to Canary Wharf. Then we saw that spread to Norwich, you know, hardly like the hotbed of the right in the United Kingdom. Then there was the High Court decision. And all of a sudden, what happened? The mainstream media couldn't ignore the story anymore. Nigel Farage feels comfortable to move Reform UK to that place. So I have no doubt that Nigel wouldn't have just done this if it was only coverage online. But the point is, what we did online and in the independent media, and by the way, huge credit to those citizen journalists, some incredible people. I mean, Jack Hadfield, Sidney Jones, Adam Brooks, you know, He Speaks Freely. There's a whole load of them, and I feel bad not mentioning them all. But they were the ones who were able to shine a spotlight on this and make it impossible to ignore. Remember, for a long time, Reform UK was actually demanding, ordering their councillors not to attend these protests.
So, Charlie, the very online right, so-called, an accusation ironically levelled at us by people who seem to spend their days scouring the internet for things to get upset about, which strikes me as a bit of an irony. But as Dan says, not only shaping, but actually amplifying the public mood and public opinion.
Yeah, well, this is what's interesting about the whole idea of the online right. And I actually said this in an interview with Peter earlier this year.
All right.
Which is that there is this, you know, it's not like the online right is this siloed kind of separate thing. What the online right and the online space is, in reality, is essentially the radical consciousness of, in Britain, the British people, right? The people that you read on there who are, you know, very online, generally actually are 18 months to 2 years ahead of the curve on a lot of ideas. Like, we've been talking about mass deportations and deporting all illegal immigrants as a matter of principle for a very long time.
Probably 18 months at this point.
And so, I mean, you know, Connor, for example, Connor Tomlinson, when he and I were on the stage at the Reform Conference last year, and that was, what, August or September last year, we were calling for mass deportations then. And it was, you know, it was met with standing ovation by Reform's membership. And it shows you the sort of time scale that mainstream politics operates on, which is that it's just a lot more slower moving than the kind of the dynamism and the nimbleness of the online space.
Yes, and so pick up the view of the public before the political establishment does, certainly before the mainstream media does. I mean, just this week, the Today programme, Emma Barnett on the Today programme literally saying to Zia Youssef, who had stated a fact, you can't say that. It shows how they think. Because actually, no, we can say that, we will say that, and soon you're going to have to say this too.
And the point is, I think, is mainstream politicians and political parties, especially in the case of Reform and Farage, they're not really thought leaders. They are, as Gawain Towler has said in the past, you know, Farage is never at the crest of the wave. He's always slightly behind, which from a political strategy perspective, I guess does make sense to a certain extent if your concern is being pally with the mainstream media and going to swanky Westminster drinks parties and all the rest of it. But actually, it's us, in a lot of cases, the radical consciousness of the British people, as I've just mentioned, who gives politicians the permission, who gives the politicians the language, you know, to talk about these issues, right? And I wonder going on from Reform's commitment to mass deportations this week, I wonder what comes next, because there's still a long time until the next general election. Whether it will be in 2029, I think is very, very, very much up for debate. But I'm sort of looking now at the space we have for pushing the dialogue further, for moving the Overton window further. And I really think the sky's the limit. I think that the mainstream media, as you have said, in saying things like you're not allowed to say that, in the eyes of most people, they have lost all credibility because they are basically viewed as an arm of the state. They are nominally independent from the government. But when you turn on ITV, Sky News, when you read The Guardian, they're acting as a mouthpiece. They're acting as propagandists. They're acting as a mouthpiece of the state. And so ordinary people just don't view them as legitimate. And so I think you're right that they will, in a few years' time, we're going to see the Guardians of this world, I think, conceding on issues like mass deportations and beyond. Because we look at the evidence of our own senses about what's happening in this country. When you go out onto the streets and when you look at the data that the government itself, sparsely releases, and there's just no denying what needs to be done in this country. Now, again, I think it's really us who gives people the permission to actually confront those issues.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
100%, because the idea that the mainstream media still propagates that these illegal criminals, terrorists, rapists, murderers, invading our country every single day, this idea that we see propagated in the mainstream media every single day through their coverage, that they are the victims, that they are asylum seekers, we all know is just a lie.
Yeah.
It is a complete and utter lie. Their language is totally indicative of, I believe, a veil of secrecy that has been put over this issue for 2 decades, to be honest. And it is only now that the truth is starting to emerge. Sure, there are going to be people who are on the back foot, but I guess it's always that fine line, isn't it? Like, actually, there's a huge amount to criticise when it comes to the Conservative Party, a huge amount to criticise.
Yeah.
But they're now part of this Overton shifting moment as well. Doesn't mean I'm going to vote for them. Doesn't mean I'm ever going to trust them again. Doesn't mean that I want them in government. But if Robert Jenrick is going to pull Farage to the right, then in my view, that is only a good thing.
Well, this I think is the point. And Harrison, this is a point that you make quite often, which is that the problem with populism, as embodied in, Reform and Farage, is that they don't, they meet the crowd where the crowd is and basically just tells the crowd what they want. That's the nature of populism. And they do it for, because they want to be popular. Populism is really the philosophy of popularity, which in a mass democracy like our own maybe is a good strategy. But actually what you should be doing as a leader, as against a populist, is recognising where the crowd is, recognising what needs to happen and bringing the crowd forward with you. And that's what Reform, I think, are failing to do at this moment. Because I think what this country is, if you look at the continent, for example, a lot of their right-wing parties are doing what I've just described, in that they are recognising where public mood is, looking at what is essentially what they can get away with in terms of what they're saying, and going there and creating space. And this is what Trump did as well. This is what Trump does so well. And I think for the kind of party, the kind of political force that Britain needs right now is the kind of one that will be prepared to go into territory that is largely, especially in the eyes of the mainstream, viewed as being beyond the pale. But you go into that territory, you stick your flag there, and then you wait for everybody to catch up with you. And that's that's largely what the online right has been doing.
I mean, Farage wants to be mates with the mainstream media. It is insane to me. And look, some people might think I'm looking at this through the lens of the media, but come on, we all know the damage that the British Fashion Corporation, Woke ITV, Sly News, Channel 4 has done to this country over the past decade. Look at them on Brexit. Look at them on COVID. Look at them on vaccines. Look at them now on mass deportations. They are the regime media. They operate on behalf of the state to cover up the truth and to push an agenda. Farage should be doing what Trump is doing, which is attacking these
Taking a
assholes
sledgehammer to them
every single day. Instead, he wants to be their friend. He wants to appeal to them. He wants the Daily Mail to embrace him. He wants to do the softball interviews on BBC podcasts. Personally, I think it's an insane strategy, but I guess there's responsibility on us as well, because we have to be able to prove that actually we have the audience, we have the power, we have the influence where you can actually avoid the mainstream media. And I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're certainly growing. And by the time of the next election, Farage needs to not think that speaking to the damn Daily Express is important, and he needs to be speaking to people direct through the independent media, just like Trump did.
Or at the very least,
like Trump did.
Yeah, at the very least, rather than, again, going to the mainstream media and essentially asking them for coverage, forcing them to come to him.
Yes.
Because like, you look at, like in the States, for example, CNN is still screeching about Trump to this day. And you know, Trump was never going to win over CNN, in the same way that Reform is never going to win over The Guardian.
And so it's delusional. But it's the same thing with the deep state, the Civil Service. Stop trying to win them over. All of this. It's like, no, Farage, you go to war. That is what we need. And this whole argument, by the way, that there's only reform. Reform is our only hope. Well, I'm sorry, there is 4 years before this next election. I ask everyone, and there's always silence if they're a reform supporter. Look, I back Nigel, obviously, as a human being. I was a colleague with him, a friend of him for many years at GB News, and even before that at Talk. But if Nigel were to drop dead tomorrow, would you feel the same way about Reform UK as you do today? And the answer is always no, which proves to me Reform UK isn't where it needs to be. Because for us to have a revolution, which is what's required, we cannot have a personality cult.
Yeah, but once again, and Harrison, I realise...
No, keep going. It's good. Good stuff.
You know, once again, I think Reform, you know, to their credit, can be influenced, right? And I think right now
but that
is their great utility as a mainstream kind of battering ram. And I think a lot of those people who are polling for them right now, putting them on, you know, the 33% that we're sometimes seeing from certain pollsters, a lot of those people are just voting for them because they do view them as the only option, and perhaps rightly, because the Conservatives are a tailspin, Labour are absolutely ridiculous, and all of the other parties are essentially all the same. There's no meaningful difference between like the Greens and the Lib Dems.
But could there be a new force? That's the question. I mean, no one believed that Macron was going to become the French president until about 6 months before his election. So what I am not prepared to do is constantly swallow my pride, put my morals to one side, put what I really believe to one side to say, oh, this is our best hope. No, there is 4 years until the next election. All bets are off at this point. What we need to do is change the conversation. Yes, if reform can get to the right place, then great. And by the way, a lot of reformists, Faragists, cultists view someone like me as the enemy. It's like, you're insane. I'm currently your best friend because I am ensuring that this party does not move to the left of the Conservatives, which Farage proudly boasted he wanted to be at in the damn New Statesman.
And if you look at recent British history as well, recent British political history, it is precisely when our official right-wing parties feel like they're the only game in town, that they are the most complacent and that they are the most inclined to let down their base. And so what I think we should be encouraging is more of a spirit of competition. What Charlie and I and Connor have been calling a sort of right-wing arms race in which people like Rupert at Restore Britain and indeed Farage and indeed Robert Jenrick to some extent and Ben Habib indeed feel a great deal of motivation to try and outbid one another from the right in order to win the sympathies of an increasingly radicalizing electorate. And it's worth saying as well, we should mention, and you had Peter Whittle, our director, on your show yesterday. We're filming this on Wednesday, so this would have been on Tuesday. And you played a very interesting clip that I'd never seen before, of which you think you got from Wolf on Twitter, of Farage talking very eloquently and very knowledgeably about Enoch Powell's experience in the aftermath of his Rivers of Blood speech in 1968. Do you firstly explain what Farage was saying and why that's relevant to what we're talking about? And do you think that he's playing more of a sort of 4D strategy than many of us on the online right, as it were, give him credit for?
Yeah, so Wolf's argument was, look, this used to be Farage. Clearly, Farage has been corrupted and captured, and something's happened for him to change his view. I take a slightly different view, which is what we were seeing in this speech about Enoch Powell, where he said Enoch Powell was effectively right, but and was his political hero, but that his whole career was destroyed because that speech went just a little bit too far, and it took the immigration debate off the table for 3 decades, arguably actually longer, because in some ways it's been off the table up until this point.
He's still a boogeyman.
Exactly. And I guess it was so refreshing to see that old school Farage and think, okay, that guy who views Enoch Powell as his political hero, who when he was still a very young politician was writing to Powell, begging to receive his endorsement. That must be how he really feels. So part of what we have to do is lay the groundwork, prove that actually the country is ready for that Farage again. But what I'm not prepared to do is play into this argument, which actually Ben Habib does as well, which is, oh no, there's no such thing as a left or a right anymore. No, there is. But being a right-wing, small c conservative party doesn't mean anymore that you turn off the working classes, that you lose the red wall. It just doesn't.
Yeah. Let's get into the plan itself then, because I think it is relevant, and there are many parts of it which are, I would say, directionally encouraging, and there are other parts at the level of detail that I would want to revise a bit and suggest improvements to. So firstly, I suppose the headline is that it is just, as we've been discussing, a pretty encouraging shift in the Overton window.
I think the very fact that they used the phrase mass deportation
is encouraging in and of itself. And also the fact that, as you were saying, like Farage taking on the media, in fairness, he was doing that at the press conference yesterday when they were asking their typical regime media pedestrian questions about
what about these poor asylum seeker rapists?
Exactly.
What about them?
And he was sort of...
Forget our young girls, forget our women, forget our people being blown up at bloody Ariana Grande
exactly.
concerts.
What might happen, potentially, if they go to Afghanistan or whatever it might be. And Farage was sort of batting away these questions with ease, and also saying, as I think he did at one point, which is a pretty radical statement given recent British political history, the British government and the British state and the British people cannot be held responsible for everything bad that goes on in the world. I don't think a politician has said anything as radical as that in quite a while. It's quite a subversive sentiment when you consider the sort of globalist uniparty with which we have to contend at the moment. So that is good. And there were also some announcements, it must be said, that would have petrified many people only a few years ago. Talk of withdrawing from the UN Refugee Convention, talk of withdrawing from the UN Convention on Torture, or at least disapplying these for 5 years or so. I would say, for what it's worth, the people interested, that it would probably be better to renegotiate the UN Refugee Convention, particularly if, say, in 2029 we have a patriotic government in Britain in tandem with a J.D. Vance-led administration in the United States. Given that America remains top dog, if Americans were going to say that we want to completely revise the UN Refugee Convention framework, which Trump has alluded to in the past, and no doubt Vance might be open to it too, we could finally take up Rafe's suggestion, Rafe Heidelmann of the show. He's constantly been banging on about, and he's right, how we should recognize that the 1951 Refugee Convention was designed for a world in which there was very little in the way of mass intracontinental movement of peoples. And so it was basically just regarded as axiomatic that if you were seeking refuge from, say, Jordan, you'd probably go to Saudi Arabia. And that if you were seeking refuge from the Netherlands as a Jewish person being persecuted or whatever it might be, you'd take the Kindertransport to Britain.
Exactly. It was a post-World War II.
Post-World War II construct to contend with our more globalized world. Rafe has suggested, and I think others have too, there should be a built into the UN Refugee Convention should be an expectation that refugees seek asylum in their continent of origin in order to ensure as little in the way of cultural friction between refugees and populations and hosts as possible, this would be a very good thing to do. And it would mean that we only really had to take in refugees from places like France or Ireland or Scandinavia, which would be much, much less disruptive. So I would make that revision to that, but nevertheless some encouraging signs of boldness as regards the international.
Yes, I mean, a couple
quo.
of points to pick up on there. Firstly, just the dishonesty of the regime media, because there is the mention of the word torture. The BBC literally suggested, I'm not even exaggerating, that Reform UK was effectively endorsing torture around
Torture
the world.
party.
Exactly. So this is what we're having to deal with. I would still say, to be totally honest, it was a great case study in style over substance. So what happened at the announcement was brilliant in terms of the look, the feel.
The departures board.
Yeah, the departures board was amazing.
Yeah.
But also just the fact that we had these very short, punchy speeches, which we never get from our political leaders. It was very American style, short from Farage, short from Yusuf. Let's come back to him, because what the hell was he doing there and why was he in charge of this policy? That's a whole other conversation. And then lots of questions. It was great. And that's, I think, where reform is great. And yes, the use of the word mass deportations. But this is not a properly thought through plan. We know that they promised a mass deportation policy within weeks of the local elections.
Yeah.
And they did that to basically keep the very online right off their back during that local election campaign. And I don't think the plan is properly thought through. I don't think they have put anywhere near enough money into this. I mean, it's a big difference with Restore Britain and Rupert Lowe's plan, which he actually said, no, this is going to be 5 times more expensive. This is going to be incredibly costly. What was Farage's answer to that? Zia Yusuf is very good at maths.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's a start. We don't yet need a full-fledged, detailed policy.
Yes.
And actually, to be fair, I have seen people saying that this is a wise move because this doesn't give the subversive activist human rights lawyers and judges
time,
the opportunity to look through it and basically, design a strategy to counter it. So maybe in that sense it is.
Although there's a huge amount of U-turns too, though, because do you remember when Farage was campaigning against the use of military bases to house illegals, for example? So that he's also going to have to be brave. There's going to be some element of unpopularity, some communities that are upset when they know that they have to have these criminals. But the difference is, and this is, I do think, a key point of the Reform UK plan, they will be detained. This is a detention centre. The problem with the Bibi Stockholm is that these damn people are able to just go out into the community.
I would say Robert Bates and I actually, of the Centre for Migration Control, actually went through this plan together yesterday and bat ideas off each other. And we basically came up with six major criticisms of the plan. So I definitely agree with you at the level of detail. It needs more than a lick of paint.
Well, it's 3.5 pages. It's just not
Yeah, although there's a very pretty picture of an RAF Voyager A3330. So that's an advantage of sorts. But the two good things I say, which again I think are more directionally good than good in terms of granular detail. Statutory duty on the Home Secretary to deport any illegal. So it's not just an option, it's not discretionary, it would now be mandatory, and presumably the Home Secretary could be held to account for not doing so.
Whoever that may be.
Whoever that may be, indeed so. And also, I thought this was interesting, and you're right to mention the costings thing. It's how much this costs is partly a function of how ambitious you are to get people out. But a basic acknowledgement is baked into the report, which I think needs to be stressed a lot, that more or less any cost incurred is an absolute bargain because whether it requires because whatever it requires will be a great deal cheaper than the present system, which is not only extortionately expensive but nation destroying. And so those are good sort of fundamental shifts to the frames of the discussion. But as for the criticisms, well, I'll ask you two first. What would you single out? I have my thoughts, but
well, look, personally, I don't think it has been seriously thought through on a whole load of levels. But I actually saw Richard Tice, when challenged by the BBC on this last night, hold his hands up and admit that.
Really?
And I don't particularly mind that. I'm not actually going to criticise
Doesn't matter too much at this
that.
point.
Not at this point, because I think this was a big flashy press conference to show mass deportations is our policy. We don't really know how we're going to do this yet. We don't really know what it's going to cost. We don't really know how we're going to negotiate with our own judiciary and our own international agreements. But at this point, I don't think it matters. But look, this was not this was not a detailed plan
Statement
that could
of
be
intent.
put in place. But it was a statement of intent.
intent.
Exactly. To me, it was a bit like an executive summary of a report.
Right.
And I think Reform UK needed to do this.
I see. Charlie?
Yeah, in my view, I mean, again, as you've said, Harrison, it's directionally encouraging. And I think it shows you the mood of the political class. I think, because I think in a lot of ways, Reform and Farage, despite presenting themselves as being anti-establishment radicals, they are actually a good bellwether for where the establishment is. Or rather, maybe the element of the establishment that is actually prepared to confront the problems that are actually facing the country, if that makes any sense.
Rather than just putting their heads in the sand.
Yeah, rather than just like bleating on about diversity and you know, and all the rest of it. Because there is, within our establishment, there is an intelligent element, and people are often unwilling to admit this. But there are people in there who are very smart and who understand what needs to be done in order for them to maintain their position as elites, in effect. I think
they cannot risk revolution.
Yeah, people like Blair is basically who I'm talking about, and Blair has long acknowledged that his solution is always digital ID, obviously, but he and his cronies have long acknowledged, like David Blunkett was in some paper this week talking about deportation and all the rest of it, right? So those kinds of people are very much, they are on the cutting edge in a certain sense on this issue, right? So the fact that it is now going mainstream, as it were, I think is very encouraging, because it shows you that that phrase mass deportations a few years ago was quite directly associated with like the far right and
Farage mistakenly, in my view, called it a sort of very dark path to go.
This is what
and a fringe view.
And now it's in all the papers, and I think that shows you where we could go if we have the courage to do so in the next few years. And I think we can get into maybe what that would look like. But back to the plan
numbers
itself,
are not high enough.
Yeah, well, this is what I was just going to say. So back to the plan itself, the ambition is nowhere near what it needs to be. They're talking about 5 flights a day and a single detention centre of 24,000. Now we're working on some modelling at the moment, which shows that there could be
Restore Britain.
That's right. Yeah, there could be over 2 million illegal migrants in Britain, and something else. Yeah, and something else that is very important, right? Is there is fairly robust research to show that the majority of illegal migrants are not those coming across on small boats or on lorries or whatever else. It's visa overstayers. And I'll tell you something else that's ridiculous. As of 2020, the Home Office does not record, it does not release exit check data, right? So they don't actually know. And there was an article published in July of this year where they admitted, the Public Accounts Committee admitted that they don't keep data on visa overstayers. So actually it's impossible to know how many people are residing in this country illegally. But those people are the bulk of the problem. And they didn't get even one mention in this plan.
Yeah, and it was concerning as well, because on page 3 it says, if you come to the UK illegally, you are ineligible for asylum. And that is good. Like, casting off at the root bogus asylum claims is a good thing to do. But given that most people don't come to the UK illegally, they come legally and then overstay illegally. That's, I think, roughly 75% of illegal immigrants in this country. That needs to be taken into account as well. The small, because it is optically dramatic, there's always this sort of focus on the small boats, and it's right and proper in a way that there should be. You need a lightning rod, preferably an imagistic lightning rod.
Egregious.
But there are sort of subtler, more, and in many ways more insidious and sinister problems as well that also merit addressing.
Well, indeed. And also, the one other point I would raise is, what about legal immigrants who break our law? Because we have proven with the Shamima Begum case that actually, if we are robust on this, the courts will do the right thing.
Yeah.
She has not been allowed back in this country. So how is that any different to a dual Pakistani citizen who has been behind the rape gangs?
Well,
I would say send them home in the same way that Shamima Begum has been kept out.
What they did was worse, I would say, than what Shamima Begum did. I mean, I'm not making excuses for her.
The only difference is they did it here. They didn't leave the country. But I think we can use that principle.
The principle can be extended, yes.
Yeah, if I could, just a couple of points there. Just back to the overstayers point, because I think this is so crucial. on Pakistanis. They are the in terms of nationality, the highest asylum claimants in Britain. And upwards of 80% of the Pakistanis claiming asylum have come here on a legal visa. Yeah. And I mean, in 2024, visa overstays accounted for 40% of asylum claimants. And we're talking about people who come across on student visas and skilled worker visas, and then they run out and suddenly they're claiming asylum, claiming that they're going to be persecuted if they get sent back to their country. And so it's just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous exploitation of our system. But Dan, I think you've touched on something important there, and this is what I would like to maybe move on to now.
Sure. Is
what reforms saying the words mass deportations and committing to this policy means for where the discourse is going to go in the next few years. Because in my view, illegal migration it's a very emotive topic because it's so obviously unjust in the eyes of most people. These people have no business being here. They're costing us money. They are, in many cases, criminals who are committing the worst imaginable crimes. People from the most violent, misogynistic regions of the world coming here and doing goodness knows what. That is egregious, and it makes for good front pages and headlines and all the rest of it. But actually, the principal problem of our age, the defining issue of this era of politics, is mass legal immigration. And you touched on this earlier, Harrison, which is that the legal infrastructure of many Western countries, especially Britain, simply hasn't kept pace with advancements in communication and transport technologies, to the point where you are now able to see migrations of millions of people across continents in a relatively short space of time. And until our legal infrastructure catches up with those, and look, Blair, to his credit, is always talking about this. He's always talking about how politics fails.
Responsible for it.
Well, that's true. But he's always talking about how politics and law fail to keep pace with technological advancements, which is a legitimate criticism. And it's something that any serious party standing in 2029 has to confront, because legal immigration is the principal problem
100%.
Facing this problem, because it's downstream from that so many of the problems that we face come: housing, healthcare, public services, schools, roads, public transport, crime. And this is the thing. The rape gangs, for example, many of the perpetrators were legal migrants, or they were born here.
Well, the vast majority were.
Yeah, 3 of the 4 7/7 bombers were born here, right? And so until we're prepared to have a conversation about that, we're not actually serious about...
Gabana.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I'm talking about. And until we're prepared, and until Reform, by the way, are prepared to confront that issue, which is that is the bleeding edge of conversation right now. And that's where we need to be pushing things.
100%.
They're not serious.
100%. Look, we have destroyed our country. We have to start having that devastating conversation. And I do not believe it is unpatriotic to say that.
No.
And I've seen a lot of people on the right. I think Tim Montgomery this week was saying, and this is the soft right, was saying, we can't talk down our United Kingdom. I'm sorry, we have destroyed our country. I have lived in London for 21 years. So let me talk about this from the prism of what I have seen happen to the greatest city in the world previously. I would say up until 2012, up until the 2012 Olympics, when Boris Johnson was still the mayor, London was the greatest city in the world. We cannot leave our houses safely now. That is a fact. This is not a lie. I mean, nothing makes me angrier when I see those little assholes like Owen Jones say that we are lying about this. Now, a friend of mine, Paul Mason, in 2020 was coming out of the Ivy, one of the poshest parts, central London.
Paul Mason, the left wing?
No.
Right, okay.
He was
BBC Political.
No. He was actually a top banker.
Got you.
And very successful man.
Coming out of the Ivy.
Single punch to the head for his phone. Conflict ensues. 6 months with a brain injury, life support is turned off. He died.
Oh my God.
So, and that's a friend of mine.
Oh gosh.
In central London. So anyone who says to me that this is some type of political statement that I'm making to try and pretend that London is lawless, I'm sorry, this is happening every single day. Paul's case is obviously completely horrific, but personally, I have been mugged twice. I've had another attempted mugging of 2 men on a motorbike, and I didn't let them take anything. And you think afterwards, because that's your natural instinct, isn't it, to protect your possessions, and you think after, what if that had a knife? I was under a bridge. There was no one around. This is happening every single day. My fiance's sister got off the train in central London the other day, within 2 minutes of leaving the tube station, standing outside a restaurant in Mayfair, her phone had been stolen. So this is a living situation. My neighbours in broad daylight the other day were robbed by 2 Asian men who literally had a drill. I called the police and went out there. The police told me to get back in the house because you're putting yourself at risk. They never showed up.
Yeah.
They never showed up. The electric bike was stolen. And another friend of mine, his best friend, was also killed just down the road from where I live in southeast London, in a Sainsbury's supermarket after a minor row about who pushed in at the till. Yeah. Now, does anyone know about that story? Does anyone know about the story of Paul Mason? No, because it's happening every single day. That's before we get to the rapes. The rapes of a young girl in Surbiton by what seemed to be illegals, as far as I can tell, just the other day. So the reason I'm telling those personal stories is that this city has been destroyed. London is probably about 5 years ahead of where the rest of the United Kingdom is going. But I'm sorry, look at Glasgow at the moment, look at Birmingham, look at Manchester,
Bradford,
look at Liverpool.
Luton,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bournemouth, Peter's great documentary about Bournemouth, a seaside town destroyed. So it is not unpatriotic to speak the truth about what mass legal immigration has done
Yes. Quite
the opposite,
to our
actually.
country.
Yeah.
We've got to start being honest about it because the change is going to need to be seismic. And yes, there's an economic cost, and we're going to have to deal with that.
The unpatriotic thing, if anything, is to surrender to the third worldification and decline of your country and not to speak out against it. It's this sort of unthinking, pedestrian, unreflective, what some people have taken to calling quite eloquently sort of shallow biscuit tin nationalism that is so characteristic of these wet, fake baby conservatives.
And let's pretend
frankly,
it's not no-go zones in London.
Yeah.
There are. Who's walking around Whitechapel at night?
These fake baby conservatives need to be defenestrated from the movement.
Yes. And that word, by the way, surrender, I think is so crucial because I've met and had conversations with people in politics and outside of it who are, broadly on side when it comes to the pressing issues, like illegal migration, for example. They're up for kicking them all out and all the rest of it. But when you start talking about legal migration, a lot of them tend to surrender to the idea that it's just locked in and this is just the way things are now.
Right,
And that,
yes.
the white British may become a minority in our lifetimes and my children and grandchildren may grow up as an ethnic minority in their own homeland. But there's nothing we can do about it. And that's because the majority of people, especially of a certain age, are so trapped within a moral political paradigm, really, that came into existence in the second part of the 20th century. And it's like a mind prison. They are unable to think outside of this truth regime, as Michel Foucault would call it. And I think, those of us on the, who are on the bleeding edge of discourse, on the online right and so on, we have largely liberated ourselves of that kind of mind prison.
Yes,
To the point-
because if you're called a racist now, or if you're called far right,
Yes.
it's meaningless.
What does it mean? My response to that is always just like, okay, so you're just like a regime sort of apparatchik using their accusations to shut down meaningful discourse.
Peter put it very, very well the other day on his brilliant piece to camera about how England awakes. He said something. He said something along the lines of far right, racist. England doesn't care for these words anymore because the English have seen the atrocities that these words
And it's
shield.
just not
That's
true.
what he put-
And
that's how he put it.
it's just not true. And look, for me, I always call it out on a very day-to-day level, what we see, what we're told. And I think a great example of this was Susanna Reid on Woke ITV's Good Morning Britain, when she was having a conversation with, of course, Kevin Maguire, saying, no, I love the fact that London is this diverse melting pot. That's such a positive thing because she knows that's what she has to say.
Yeah.
She probably believes that she thinks that because, of course, there are great things about having thriving communities if people are integrated and not breaking the law. But very quickly, an article was discovered of Susanna Reid from a couple of months earlier talking about her howl at being mugged. And it's this complete failure to see Susanna Reid. Those two things are linked.
Yes.
Okay.
They are linked. This is there is a 95% likelihood that the person who robbed you, who mugged you, was not a native Briton, or their parents were not a native Briton. And if we pretend that's not part of the conversation, we're being delusional.
This is the point, right? Is the primary source of the degradation and destruction of this country. It's not values. It's not a failure to embrace British values. It is demographics, right? And that's the case for London, because you look at the correlation is not causation, of course, but you look at the correlation between demographic change and the uptick in violent sexual crimes, a lack of contribution to the economy as well, being more of a burden on the taxpayer than a benefit.
You don't come in unless you're a benefit. And look at America. We want the best in the world. That is it. And if you're a unique citizen that can prove you're going to make us money, we might consider having you.
And back to the discourse,
speak English.
Back to the discourse and where I think it should go over the coming years, and the kind of trail that we need to blaze on that front, is talking about the fact that, no, we don't actually have to give in to this bonkers experiment of mass migration, mass demographic change in a country that has never known such upheaval. That is very alien to our culture, and is doing huge amounts of damage on every metric at every level. We don't have to actually surrender to that. We can actually say, well, look, the previous regime, they started this experiment, which they thought, I think genuinely in their heart of hearts, they thought it was a good idea. They thought that diversity was a strength. They thought that multiculturalism was a noble goal. But actually, it turned out to be completely bonkers, and it really has put us on the path to civil unrest, civil war, becoming a minority in our own homeland. And so what we need to do, the just, moral, righteous thing to do, is to reverse it. And that doesn't mean, violence, and it doesn't mean kicking in doors and all the rest of it. But what it does mean is rethinking how we govern this country in the era of mass migration, in the era of the ability of millions of people to move across continents. Think about that and think about how we become resilient to that, because it is a damaging thing. It's not a positive thing. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, look, a lot of the people who have come here legally, especially over the last 30 years, and those who have been born here, they don't belong here. And they do need to go back to the homes of the countries of their ancestors. And that is the righteous and moral thing. And I think we are going to see that idea enter mainstream discourse in literally the next couple of years.
Well, we are, because, of course, the one issue that we haven't discussed today, but it's obviously something that all three of us do talk about, are prepared to talk about, even though there are great risks that come with it, is the completely nefarious nature of Islam and this takeover that is happening. And it has started in London, it has started in some other places like Bradford,
concentrations,
and we're going to see this, I believe, become a mainstream issue. And so this is the thing. It's like mass deportations is only the start of the change of the conversation that needs to be had, because Nigel Farage, I imagine at this point, stands by his comments to Stephen Edgington, which is that demography doesn't matter to me whatsoever. Religion doesn't matter to me whatsoever. And it does matter. And it really, really matters, because I just think about what I've seen with my own eyes happening in Tower Hamlets. I used to live in Tower Hamlets. This is now a radicalized part of the United Kingdom where British-born teenagers are taught that a gay person like me should be shoved off the top of a building in mosques, which are run totally in above board manner and embraced by lunatics like Sadiq Khan. So yes, the point is we're only at the start of this conversation, because yes, of course, legal immigration is going to be a big part of this, but I'm sorry, so is religion, because there is a difference between, and I don't even use the word extreme, this is the Gad Saad argument. Let's stop even just saying extreme Islam. No. It's about the Islam takeover of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, well, religion, people's theological, cosmological, and moral perspective on the world, why would that matter one bit? Yeah, right. But it's been such a privilege having you, Dan. I'm afraid we do need to wrap up.
Great to be back.
But I'll end by saying that it is encouraging that the unimaginative name-calling no longer works. Bismarck described politics as the art of the possible. I sense that our collective understanding of what's possible is only going to broaden in the coming months and years, and that is a very good thing. We have some spicy questions sent in to you directly from our audience. Some of them quite salacious, but you're not above that. But thank you for coming for this portion of the show. Charlie, thank you so much for stepping in.
Thank you.
As co-host, and thank you for watching. If you want to catch Dan Wootton's answers to your questions, do consider subscribing signing up, in fact, as an NCF member. Do subscribe as well. Give this video a like and a comment if you wish to do so, and we shall see you on the next.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.